Greetings and welcome to In Depth. I'm Dike Rostant. World Refugee Day is observed on June 20 and is an occasion to build empathy and understanding for migrants' plight and to recognize their resilience in rebuilding their lives. To discuss this further, we have head of the UNHCR National Office in T&T, Miriam Aertker, and head of protection, UNHCR T&T, Amanda Solano. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for being with us. I want to start off with you, please, Miriam, and asking, give us a definition. What does it mean to seek asylum?
Thank you very much, and it's really great to be here. Of course, everybody has the right to seek asylum. So as really looking at the World Refugee Day of 2022, of course, this World Refugee Day is an annual event. And of course, we are looking at the World Refugee Day's theme is whoever, whenever, wherever everybody has a right to seek safety. So what it means to seek asylum, there's the right to seek asylum. Seeking asylum is always a human right. Anyone fleeing persecution, conflict, or human rights abuses have a right to seek protection in another country. That also means there should be safe access. Borders should always remain open to all people forced to flee. Also, restricting access and closing borders can make the journey even more dangerous for people seeking safety. There should also not be pushbacks. That is another element of seeking asylum. People can't be forced to return to a country where their life might be in danger or their freedom would be at risk. This means that countries shouldn't push anyone back without first evaluating the dangers they would face back home. I will mention two more aspects of what it means to seek asylum. There should not be discrimination. People should not be discriminated against at borders. All applications for refugee status, for instance, must be given fair consideration, regardless of factors like race, religion, gender, as well as country of origin. And of course, last but not least, there should always be humane treatment. People forced to flee should be treated with respect and dignity. They are always entitled to safe and dignified treatment like any other human being. Among other things, this means keeping families together, protecting people from traffickers, and avoiding arbitrary detention. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. And Amanda, what are some of those reasons that people say, okay, well, and as Miriam just outlined, it may be dangerous to try to cross that border, but what are some of those reasons that people say, okay, well, yes, it may be dangerous, but I'm going to take this decision because where I am, to me, is less ideal than the dangers I may face getting to where I want to be?
Yes, thank you for the question. People flee their countries for different reasons. It can be related to violence, to war, to internal conflict, or to human rights violations that force people into leaving their homes, leaving their countries, and coming to another country to seek protection. And this is why it's a human right, because everybody has the right to be saved and secure.
And with regard to those rights, I want both of you to go through and talk about the importance of inclusion and integration in terms of what it is we're speaking about at this point in time. We speak with you both first, Miriam, and then Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we wanted to really highlight the importance of inclusion at any point in time during the displacement. You know, when an asylum seeker or a refugee comes into the country, it's very important that we think about inclusion from the onset of the displacement so that people become immediately self-reliant and also don't depend on humanitarian aid for too long. It is very, very important that we are happy and that we are providing the necessary support, assistance and protection support, and that we support the government in any of the countries that we are working so that refugees and asylum seekers are protected and assisted. Refugees may have also difficulties getting qualifications recognized. So there's a lot we can do so that this obstacle could be overcome. In, for instance, Trinidad and Tobago, Also, the majority of refugees and asylum seekers at this moment do not have work permits. Yet a lot of refugees and migrants have been receiving work permits through the registration activities that is very commendable of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. But in a nutshell, we always support as UNHCR the regularization and socioeconomic inclusion of refugees, asylum seekers and migrants as a top priority. And asylum seekers and refugees bring a lot of skills. I wanted to emphasize this. If refugees and asylum seekers are integrated well, then this will always be a win-win situation for the host community as well. They bring in skills, they are doctors, nurses, teachers, you name it. So utilizing also these skills of people coming into the country, as well as the bilinguality, can be really a benefit to the hosting country as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to ask you the same question, please, Amanda.
Yes. So inclusion and integration is achieved when the persons have local and social inclusion. For example, this means if there is refugees in your communities, you can welcome them into the neighborhood. If you have a football team, you can integrate them into the team. It means just creating this network of friends and neighbors within your community. Then there is the legal inclusion, which has to do with having proper documentation in the country that can prove that you're allowed to be here and work legally. And then there is the job inclusion or work inclusion, which, as Miriam pointed out, if they have the right to work, they can join the workforce and they can bring new ideas, innovative ideas that maybe were going on in their country, and that they bring into the new country with them.
And ladies, you spoke about government and you actually had some complimentary things for the government of Trinidad and Tobago. I want to go a little broader, so as not necessarily speaking specifically about this government, but what are some of those bureaucratic challenges that may be involved in the process of finding a new home? What are some of the things that UNHCR has found in different jurisdictions and has to try to facilitate or deal with?
Maybe I can start with that. I mean, as already pointed out by Amanda, there are often bureaucratic legal obstacles, but also administrative obstacles. You know, one of the most important human rights is access to education. At this moment, there are a lot of administrative barriers, for instance, to access primary education for children. So the question is always, how can we overcome these kind of bureaucratic obstacles so that children can have access to education while in displacement? And of course, there are more administrative hurdles, but this is what I wanted to highlight as one of the most important ones. Thank you.
And thank you as well. Stay with us. We are taking a short break. When we come back, we continue this discussion. We're doing so with Miriam Aertker as well as Amanda Solano. Stay with us. We return with more. Welcome back. We are discussing the UN Refugee Agency's activities and some of the reasons they do what they do, the rationale behind it. And we're doing so with Amanda Solano, Miriam Aertker. And Amanda, when you were talking about integration and inclusion, you mentioned things like regularizing, including individuals on a football team if it's in the community. What are some of the reasons that you get people pushing back and say, no, we don't want to do this. We don't think that we should have to do this. What are some of those reasons? What are some of the feedback that you receive?
Well, there's of course that type of feedback, but I have to point out that most communities are actually very welcome. We have a project of Cities of Solidarities in Chaguanas where they are very willing to welcome refugees. We have heard this from several communities across the country, including Tobago, where people have been very welcoming towards refugees. And we actually have, for World Refugee Day, we're launching a TV movie on an excellent example of a volleyball team on how refugees and host communities come together to integrate. I believe sometimes it's fear of the unknown. When you don't know who is a refugee or exactly what makes a person a refugee, maybe at first you tend to be a bit scared and skeptical, but once you know them and they're in your community, they become your neighbor, etc. And then you begin to understand and you open up into welcoming refugees into the communities. At least that has been our experience in Trinidad and Tobago so far.
So far, and we're grateful to hear that from you. Ms. Aertker, I want to ask you about the specific role of UNHCR in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
Of course. Since 2016, we are actually based in Trinidad and Tobago to increase international protection for forcibly displaced populations here and to work very, very closely, as Amanda said, with local communities for the inclusion and for the supports. As UNHCR, we are really here to support the government, as already mentioned, of Trinidad and Tobago in the assistance and the protection of asylum seekers and refugees. And it's very, very important for us that we do not create parallel systems, but rather help the different organizations and the different entities and the different programs to be equipped also to include refugees and asylum seekers. Our programs in Trinidad and Tobago focus on education support while children do not have access to the national education system at this moment. So we have a program of Equal Place that we are supporting together with other agencies, where a small number of refugees and asylum seekers and migrants can access online education. We also, as Amanda said, do community engagement and capacity building initiatives. We work very, very closely with community-based organizations and, of course, our direct partners in the provision of secondary and tertiary healthcare, but also in the provision of small-scale livelihood programs. We also do support temporarily with some basic cash-based interventions for very vulnerable individuals among the refugee and asylum seeker community. And of course, we do also have a quite big program on registration of asylum seekers in Trinidad and Tobago. We also do see who is a refugee and who is not through our refugee status determination team, and we resettle a small number of refugees to third countries. We do a lot of public information and advocacy, and we work very, very closely with the different ministries and authorities so that refugees and asylum seekers and migrants can be better protected. Last but not least, I wanted to highlight that so far, at this moment, we do have over 22,000 asylum seekers and refugees registered with UNHCR Trinidad and Tobago. This includes Venezuelans with more than 86%, but also people of other nationalities that have sought refuge in Trinidad and Tobago. And this includes also Cubans, Jamaicans, Nigerians, Chinese, and people from the DR, but also from Bangladesh, Guyana, and Syria, among other countries. In total, we have people from 38 different countries registered with UNHCR in Trinidad and Tobago.
And I like the fact that you talk about not having to reinvent the wheel, but what are some, especially in an environment where individuals are speaking about scarce resources, but what is a concrete example of saying, okay, well, as opposed to replicating this good, this service, this opportunity, we're linking with some of those stakeholders that you would have mentioned to say, okay, well, this is possible through this and we're just facilitating it?
I believe that we have a really great opportunity on education. Like in many other countries around the world, we work very closely with the different schools for inclusion of refugee children into national schools. And we are talking about a really great opportunity here of about 6,000 children that are out of school at this moment. Through support by UNHCR, but also other agencies, and rather supporting really the schools, classroom construction with teachers, with human resources, with financial and material support. We see that this would be a lot more sustainable rather than to set up or to maintain an online system that we are currently having for only 1,500 refugee and migrant children. So again, with very simple means, and many countries around the world do not have the legal procedures or the administrative procedures that hinder access to asylum seekers and refugees to access the national education system in place. So we think this is a really great opportunity and a rather small number for inclusion, meaning that if we talk about the schools all across Trinidad and Tobago, we will have a very small number of refugees and migrants included into the different schools. Children can learn hand in hand. This will have a really big impact on the coexistence of the different communities, on the language. Children will also learn automatically when they are in school English, and vice versa. They can also teach local children Spanish. So we see a lot of opportunities here. And again, we can rather use all our resources in the inclusion here of refugee and migrant children into the local systems than rather maintaining an online parallel system. So we hope that with all the advocacy efforts and with all our interventions, we can make a change eventually and support the inclusion of refugee children into national schools.
Thank you so much. In the last 3 minutes that we have, ladies, and I want to start with you, please, Amanda, in terms of bringing you into the conversation. How has the pandemic affected the work that you do? And also, how can individuals say, okay, well, I'm not a part of an NGO or CSO. How can we support refugees, asylum seekers in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yes, I believe the pandemic has challenges for everybody. So unfortunately, in terms of the refugees and asylum seekers, some of them lost their job because they work in the service industry, but now that the economy is starting to recover, we trust that they can get back these jobs. And in terms of UNHCR, I believe it made us more creative and innovative because we had to come up with online services and use technology to better offer our services and protection to those asylum seekers and refugees. And in terms of what you can do, this is a great question. And there's many things you can do as a member of the community. One is to spread the word, like sensitize on why people become refugees, what is their contribution in the country, introduce them to your family, network of friends, etc. You can also donate if this is something that you are in a position to do. Or you can also join organizations such as UNHCR and NGOs, universities who are also working for refugees and asylum seekers, or you can advocate for your own platform towards human rights and access to rights for refugees and asylum seekers.
All right, and the last minute is yours, Miriam.
Yes, and I want to add to what Amanda already mentioned. Everybody can advocate for inclusion. If you are part of schools, school boards, family groups, you can advocate for inclusion of refugee and migrant children into local schools. You can also support refugees and get to know refugees and asylum seekers and migrants. Get to know them and play with them for your children. Work with them, cook with them, as a community, get closer to each other, engage with them and give also opportunities. As UNHCR, we don't only support refugees and asylum seekers, but also local opportunities. We can at times support small livelihood initiatives as well that can be done jointly with both communities. So there are a lot of ways how to engage, and we really look forward to hear from everybody soon and to really be in this together, because we are here to support as UNHCR, and we are very, very grateful for all the support that already exists in the local communities despite all the challenges. Thank you.
And we are grateful that you've taken the time to share this information with us. Miriam Aertker, UNHCR T&T Head of National Office, as well as Amanda Solano, UNHCR T&T Head of Protection. On behalf of the entire TTT News team, I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth with me. Thank you for joining us.